stuff. I think it's sometimes really helpful for people to see that there's, like a lot of moving pieces that go on with stuff like this. And sometimes it doesn't always work the way that you think it's going to.
We do what we can, Trish.
We do what we can, Alli. Okay, so that's coming. It's really helpful for people to see that there's, like a lot of moving pieces that go on with stuff. Oh, that's just my YouTube. I've got that muted now. See, all things happening. Okay, so welcome everybody to Soul Talk Tuesday. I am your host, Trish Murray, and with me today is the one and only Alli MacKenzie. I have to say, you guys, this person is one of my favorite humans on the planet. And I know that I say that about some people, but like genuinely, if you were a fly on the wall in some of the conversations or the texts that Alli and I trade back and forth, you would understand why I just adore this girl so much, woman, so much. So,
thank you. Thank you. It's shared. It's mutual, just so you know.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tee this up so that Alli can do a bit of an introduction, let you know who she is if this is your first encounter with her. But before I do that, if this is your first encounter with me, I'm Trish Murray. I host the New Age Tour Guide podcast. This is a subset of that. This idea of, getting into more of a soul conversation. How does this new age, how are some of these big ideas really playing out in our everyday life right now, and how can we find tools and conversations and ideas and insights that can help us navigate through what is, I'm going to just say it for whoever doesn't want to say it, navigate through some very chaotic and confusing times right now. So I'm going to let Alli take the mic. There's a few questions that I have for her, and then I'm going to let her kind of weave in what came through from the Akashic Records, and we'll see where the conversation goes. So over to you, Miss Alli.
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for having me on. Of course, I love sharing, and I just love you so very much too. So when I get to pair the two together, it's just like a little special treat for me. So I'm Alli MacKenzie. I am a hypnotherapist, energy healer. I am an intuitive coach, I guess I could call myself. And really who I like to work with or focus on are the spiritually curious. So those who are, really feeling like there's something else for them, or like they're ready to go a little bit deeper within themselves and figure out what this world is all about and how we can really live fully in it. And so, it's really about supporting you in awakening your infinite potential, realizing what could be possible for you, maybe giving you the confidence to actually step into that, and really consciously co-creating an abundant life. Because I feel like for whatever reason, we've kind of forgotten that a little bit along the way. So when we can be reminded that we are actually these empowered co-creators and we do have a certain locus of control that we can work with, then that's a really great place to start. So a lot of what I do is in the world of energetics, I guess you could say. So I work with the Akashic Records quite a bit. I have the records running for us today. I've done a little bit of a deep dive for us so we can have a really good idea as to how to kind of navigate this year, and like Trish was speaking to is, how do we make sense of the chaos? How do we start to understand some of the craziness that's happening, and how can we move through that with a little bit more peace and understanding? Reiki is a great way that we can also access the Akashic Records. That's one of the modalities I use and teach too. Of course, the hypnotherapy piece is really important when it comes to addressing those programs that we're all, always running in the unconscious. It's the programs that really create our reality. And then, of course, it's through really meeting you where you're at and coaching you where you'd like to be. And so, Trish, I apologize. Did you want me to kind of dive into what came through for us, or do you want to have a bit of a conversation before we do that?
No, what I would, if it's okay with you, if this feels okay for you, Alli, I'd like to address a piece that I put into a previous podcast, because I said to my listeners in that podcast, episode 7, where we were talking about one foot in two worlds, living with one foot in two worlds, which is really so true for me. In that, I talked about this conversation that you and I had at dinner one night about the map of consciousness and David Hawkins. And I really wanted to create some space for you to speak a little bit about how you use that, because the words that you used when we were talking about it are what I was trying to weave through that podcast. So if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about that, and I forgot to press the recording. So that's on now. But if you could just kind of go back into that conversation we were having. We were at dinner talking about what it felt like at certain points in our journey when we were living, and it felt like we were living with one foot in two worlds.
Yeah.
And this came up.
Absolutely. So I really love the map of consciousness or the scale of consciousness because it really showcases the spectrum of the human experience. And I think often a lot of us feel like, well, I need to be grateful all the time, or I need to be loving all the time, and I'm not supposed to feel fear, I'm not supposed to feel shame or grief, when really, as much as yes, you know, and I'll get to this, that we do want to live at love and above, but it doesn't mean that love is necessarily better than fear or better than shame. You know, there really is a place for all of these emotions to be felt. And that really is part of the full human experience. I mean, that's what we all signed up for, whether we remember that little conversation or not. But we're here and that's part of it. And so the intention, though, which I do also feel is part of the human experience, is we are meant to live at love. However, based on the research of Dr. Hawkins, is the majority of our population is living kind of around the middle of this scale. Okay. So around the middle, we have courage. Maybe there's a bit of willingness. Okay. Some pride is in there. And so what happens is I feel like that's kind of when we're in between both worlds, right? Because we're going, well, I have the courage to step into something else, but do I want to, or am I ready to? And then we're sort of being pulled in either direction. And what happens, I feel, for a lot of us is when we're living in that sort of middle playing field and things do happen where we do feel fear or grief, or something happens that really just pulls us out of our center, and we're in more of those contracted states, those heavier emotions, we don't always give ourselves the opportunity to process those emotions. Okay. We either try to disregard them entirely or we get stuck in them. But there's this sort of tug of war that happens. And regardless of whether or not we're conscious of this, it is going on. And what I find happens, because most of us are living in this middle realm, it's very easy to then get stuck, to really start to live in those lower, denser emotions. And again, there's nothing wrong with those emotions, but we're not meant to live there. We're meant to feel them. We're meant to experience them, to process them, to move through them, to better understand ourselves and the world around us, so that we can then, you know, make our way back up to love and above. And so where I'm going with this is, if we can learn as a collective to live at love, when something does happen, when life does go sideways and we are bumped downwards, or we're bumped to those heavier emotions, we go, okay, well, I'm going to feel this. I'm going to let myself feel this as deeply as I can. I might not have time to, but I'm going to make the time to really honor myself and what's going on for me, so that I can more quickly come back to love and live here. But what's happening is a lot of us are living down here. We're living in fear. We're living in our shame or our frustration, and we're bumping up to love sometimes. Something great happens, we enjoy it for a little bit, and then we go, oh, well, that's not going to last. Let me go back to where I'm living. And then I bring it back to this sense of comfort, right? Because a lot of us will go, well, I don't want to live in frustration or live in fear. It's just my life has been this way and this is where I am. But we get used to that. We do, as uncomfortable as it is, we get comfortable being uncomfortable. And when something really great happens, it's like we don't know how to hold on to that. And I think it's no coincidence that Earth is an acronym for heart, that we are here to experience love, to feel it, to share it, to gift it, but to live in it as much as we can. And that's how I feel about that scale. I think it can be really helpful.
I love that. I mean, there's so many things that we could go back into on that, and I'm not going to because because we'd be here forever. But you know, one of the things that I would like to talk a little bit about on that is, yes, the end game for us is to live from love. And I liked how you just how that quirky little phrase that you've got, you know, from at love and above, at love and above, because there are, you know, frequencies that are even higher than love on his scale. And I don't know if you've seen this or not, but I just happened to cross a little piece of research that was talking about maybe somebody expanding on David Hawkins' work or something, but they were saying how authenticity is 4 times higher on the frequency scale than love. Authenticity. And that, when I read that, you know, I haven't been able to validate that. So, you know, if you're kind of a science geek like me, you know, hold that with a grain of sand for right now. But what really impressed upon me was this invitation that I feel like all of this is bringing forward for us as we're navigating through these very age-changing times with all of the crazy chaos and really confusing situations going on in our world. The invitation is to come back into our most authentic self. Like, who is that? How do we define that for ourselves, rather than letting what's going on out there define it for us? And I think you kind of touched into this. So I'd love for you to just unpack it a little bit more, Alli, this idea of, you know, you talked about the locus of control, right? Between, you know, we either believe that it's out there, or we have started to really embrace the idea that, wow, this is actually really all it's an inside job.
Very much so. And when it comes to authenticity, I link it back to, so we actually just watched a movie the other day with Hunter, and it's called Evan Almighty. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it. It's like the second to Bruce Almighty. And there's this part in the movie where I think he was praying to be closer to his family. Okay. There was this intention of, okay, things are going great. I have this big plan over here, but I also want to be closer to my family. And then so God comes along and starts kind of interfering with his life a little bit and giving him this other project that he's supposed to be putting his energy into. And Evan goes, well, this isn't part of my plan. Like, this is like, I don't know what you think you're doing, but I have this plan over here and I have it all figured out. And of course, God starts laughing at him and says, your plan. Okay. But what it comes down to is, whenever we pray for anything, we have to remember we're not just going to get that and it's done, right? It's kind of like, you know, if you teach a man to fish, then he'll be able to fish for life, versus just giving him a fish to eat for the day, right? So it's this personal responsibility that we're taking. And so when it comes to being authentic, if we are in this age of authenticity, or this is a goal or intention of ours, is God not going to then give us an opportunity to discover what it means to be authentic, or to support us in figuring out how to be authentic? And so I feel like that is why life has been the way it's been on planet Earth for the last little while, because he's saying, this is where I know you all want to get to, whether this is conscious or unconscious, but this is part of the plan. Okay. This is our collective plan, not just my own. We all want to live a fulfilled life. We get lost in figuring out how to get back to that space. So I feel like, especially this year, for sure, we are in a year of opportunity. Like, I have goosebumps when I say that, because literally this year is a time and space for all of us to say, okay, am I ready? Am I ready to fully accept what the plan is? Am I ready to really let my authenticity shine, so that I can live a life of peace, of joy, of fulfillment? And so I think it's about the opportunity. It's about, are we willing or not willing to step into that and receive it?
Oh my gosh, there was a moment where you were talking about the receiving part of it, and are we willing to step into the plan where, you know, some people get goosebumps. For me, it's like this like deep sense of like settled, and all of a sudden I could feel my whole body go, "Ooh, that's truth right
That
there.
feels good.
That's truth right there," because it really did really resonate for me. One of the things that really popped for me this year, as I was considering, you know, just stuff, was, and I don't even know if I can say that it was a direct download or if it was just, you know, that voice of wisdom that kind of comes through when we're being quiet and still. But what I heard over and over again is stop asking for permission. And I was like, I didn't know I was. But apparently I had been in certain ways, in certain spaces, in certain elements of the plan. I I got the opportunity to really see that, okay, I'm not being as authentic as I could be, because somewhere in the mix of all of this stuff, I'm still waiting for permission to go ahead and do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this seems like a really nice segue to get into a little bit of what came through for you from the Akashic Records. You know, we're talking about this idea of how do we step into living at a different level of consciousness? How do we maybe look at authenticity a little differently than maybe we have been before? And this year, I certainly got a lot of interesting insights. So please, let's start with you and see how this dovetails with what came through from the numerology and human design.
Okay, perfect. So when I first entered the records with the intention of, you know, what is for us this year? How do we navigate this? How do we make sense of it? How do we live as our authentic selves? I thought it was really interesting that literally the first thing that came through was peace be upon us. And so, I mean, that's like, even if I think about the energy of that, I mean, that is very connected to Jesus, obviously, if we're looking at ascended masters. But it's almost kind of like, and this is going to make sense in a second here, but it's almost kind of like a reminder that, you know, he's already made the utmost sacrifice for us. So like the hardest piece is done is kind of what he's saying, right? But what's interesting is also what kept coming forward was almost like this image of the bow and arrow. And so it's like all of these things have happened that have been pulling us further and further away from source, in a sense, or further away from God. But what these forces don't understand is that it's exactly what we needed to come back home. And so it's like we're at the point of now, it's like the arrow has taken flight. And so we are headed in the direction. And when I say home, I mean back to source, back to ourselves, back to our soul. And it's everything that's happened up until this point has been in preparation for that. It's been in preparation for the journey. So it's very much now about like, enjoy the fucking ride. Like, enjoy it, because you've been through like some of the biggest tests of all, right? And now it's like you get to explore what you do with that. With that being said, I feel like, and I sense, and what's coming through is that there's a lot of angelic support. Like, we are all surrounded and infinitely supported by angelic presence. And there's a really strong invitation to take advantage of that. And so whether or not you already are connected to your spiritual team, or this is something new for you, even just start to look into the archangels, like which one is speaking to you, which one do you kind of feel connected to, and really just start communicating and asking and speaking with that energy, because it is here. Like, they're just like, we are here more than we ever have been. Like, we've always been supporting you, but it's just on a deeper level now. And so what I think is really interesting too is that there is just so much energy in terms of receiving. Like, that is one of our biggest themes this year, is receiving. And so this links to a couple of different things. I mean, even if we're looking at the year, like it's the year of the snake, right? If we're looking at the Chinese New Year. And so the snake is also connected to, and this year specifically, very much yin energy, which is receiving energy. And one of the sort of examples that they kept showing for me while I was in was linking it to this whole energy of energy healers, and so, and how, of course, we want to, I would love for everybody to practice Reiki, and we would love for the world to be filled with energy healers, and not necessarily to, to share with others, but for the means of healing ourselves and remembering we can do that. But they kept showing me, they kept saying, well, why do you think us healers want more healers on the planet? Why do you think there's this invitation to step into the light? And it's to be channels, right? To be channels for these healing frequencies. But what does it entail to be any type of an energy healer? When we are channeling to somebody, we must first receive. We're not just going to give our own stuff all the time. We need to plug in and be connected to the source of all. And so it's reminding us that as well, you don't have to necessarily go and do all the courses and read all the books. It's just, what is your heart-centered intention? Do you want to heal yourself? Well, then you can heal yourself. Do you want to share the love? Well, then share the love. It's like we've been overcomplicating these things. So there's that little piece there. Now, a lot of arrows are pointing to relationships as well, that a lot of relationships are going to be adjusting this year, but for the better, especially, looking at it being a 9 year, 9 is very much about completion, right? That's the completion of a cycle. And so as you are starting to allow yourself to go deeper into self, to explore your authenticity, there's naturally going to be some endings, but also some beautiful beginnings. So they're saying, don't get held up on the ending piece. Remember that you're also entering something new. We are in a new phase, okay? And to remember to focus on your immediate circle. So less energy on what's going on out there, because at the end of the day, what's happening out here on a collective scale, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it's a reflection of what's going on internally with all of us. And so the more that we can tune into, what is it that I want to experience in my world? What do I want my life to look like? My relationships? How do I want to contribute to the world? Okay, so start that inside, right? It's all of that work is internal. So a lot of self-reflection this year too, and sort of internal processing of like, what am I seeing out here? How do I want it to be? Okay, let me start adjusting that within me. Okay. And creative expression. Creative expression is another really, really big theme. So linking it again back to that element of self-reflection, of inner connection, but also connection to God. And what I thought was really interesting, linking it back to this energy of receiving, is they kept saying, let God give. Like, let him give to you. Let yourself receive. Let him deliver. And then they kept linking it back to this sort of image of, when you're ordering something on Amazon, if you're never home to receive it, are you ever going to get it? Right? It's landed on your doorstep. But if you're not home to pick up the package, then you're not really letting yourself receive it. So you may have asked for it, you may have ordered it, but then you're not there. And so it's reminding us that our house is our soul. Our home is our soul. So come back home to your soul, turn down the outside noise, tune into what you're really wanting for your life so that you can receive what God has been trying to give you, okay? Or source or divine, whatever your language is. And then they also, pointing back to this sort of energy of healing, they kept saying joy heals. Joy is incredibly healing. It creates fulfillment. So for this year, I think we're going to see a lot of new small businesses, new ventures, just new ideas, people stepping into that because they are going to feel like they have the energy now because they're going to be turning down the outside shit. They're going to say, okay, I think I've got the energy to pursue my passions now. I think I've got this. And then what I thought was even more wild, I'm going to kind of wrap up with this piece here, is I always like to just explore with some cards while I'm in the records. And they get a 9 of Pentacles. So this is earthly energy. This is fulfillment. This is holistic fulfillment. This is inner peace. This is celebration. And it's like, for me, the message here, it's like, we have this successful harvest now. We put in all this hard work. We've been resilient as much as we could. And now it's like, we fucking made it. We made it. So it's really about fully embracing the celebration and then letting this be the momentum that carries you through the rest of this year. Because yeah, there's going to be some weird shit that happens, but again, linking it back to opportunities. And I do want to say one small piece about, new earth versus old earth. I know a lot of people get really kind of worried around that. And what they're saying is, just remember, you always have a choice. You always have a choice every single day. How do I want to show up today? Do I want to live in love? I'm going to do my darndest. And some days it might feel really fucking hard, but that's part of the human journey. That doesn't mean like you had a shitty day and you were an asshole to somebody, so you're booted back to old earth. Like, it doesn't work that way. It's just saying, where are you intentionally focusing on going, or who are you intentionally focusing on being? And so when it comes to new earth, that's literally just a frequency that you can choose to live in. And so I'm gonna wrap it up there.
I love how that kind of has just brought us full circle back to this idea of where are we living from. And so there's a couple of things that really popped out for me as you were talking, going back through some of the notes. Peace be upon us. I think that is something that's just so beautiful to hear, first of all, and an invitation, to consider that we peace can be upon us and within us, even in the midst of all of this chaos unfolding around, or what looks like chaos. And it depends on where you are, right? Like if you're following the same people I'm following, it probably looks a little more chaotic than others, because that's that's where my journey has taken me. It's not that I'm chaotic, but I'm seeing things differently. The archer and the bow. So that's, in my mind, that immediately took me to Sagittarius and astrology. And one of the themes that came through in human design, which of course is built off of astrology, was the theme of exploration. And being able to consider that, this idea that Sagittarius is very much about exploration, and exploration almost in terms of being able to develop our own direct philosophy, because we're experiencing things, but you have to explore to be able to experience, right? So I'm just kind of going back into Soul Align 2025 and thinking about, what really popped for me, and how are these things dovetailing. The energy of receiving, that just was so incredible in the context of what you were saying about being at home to receive it, being present, being in that space, and being sort of present to seeing where it might be showing up in ways that I didn't envision before, or I didn't anticipate. But even more so, and this is, again, I think this is probably more my journey than anybody else's, that I've just bounced around in so many different rabbit holes, that the invitation for me, I think, is staying present to the things that I've created, where receiving can come through. And I'm inviting everybody, as you're listening to this, like, what have you been working on? What have you been cultivating, and what have you been creating? Because when you talked about the creative fire, or the creative expression, Alli, that was something that I got as well, mostly through the astrology and listening to a couple of people who are really, really, really deep into the astrology. And this one lady, Pam Gregory, she talked about 2025, we've got this creative fire at our back, which is really, kind of motivating us or moving us to tap into that creator soul that we have. And one of the things that she had said was, wherever you've been practicing, this is a year where you get to become prolific at it. So back to, what have you been creating? What have we been ideating around? What have we been kind of fucking around with to find stuff out? And maybe now is the chance, maybe now is the invitation to take that forward. Maybe now is when the universe or our spirits, our souls are asking us to, okay, let's move it into action, right? And I love that balance point that you struck when you talked about relationships adjusting, endings and beginnings. That's absolutely what would have come through on a number of different levels, from what I looked at as well. Endings, but also beginnings. Does that mean that we don't start anything this year because it's all about endings? It's a 9-year? No. So good. So good. And I know that there's going to be at least one person in my circle who is absolutely going to be delighted to hear that joy heals. Because she's all about joy. And I think she'll just giggle when she hears that.
Well, I think we shouldn't disregard it, right? I think, especially when it comes to spiritualism, I think when a lot of us get started, we're really serious. Like, we're way too serious about it. Even if I think back to myself, I'm like, okay, well, this is what a spiritual person does. This is how a spiritual person portrays himself. And I'm like, no, the more that you step into it, the more you're like, this is about freedom. There are no rules attached. It's supposed to be intentional. Yes, we're creating containers to which we can create from within, but it's about having fun. Like, I know you and I have had many conversations, and you specifically talk a lot about play, like have fun. And I mean, even just to add a little kind of sidebar to this, it's like, well, at the end of the day, aren't we all just in a play? We're figuring out, right? Like, what is my role here? What is my authentic role? How do I want to show up? And I'm not saying from an inauthentic way by any means. I'm saying, like, what is your authentic being? Who is that person? And as we start to explore different aspects of self or different relationships, we're learning more about what aligns and what doesn't. And so even bringing it back to the endings and the beginnings, it's also being okay with maybe letting some things go, or letting some people go, or letting some ways that you thought the world was, to then find out it's not that way. Let those go. Don't let it shake you so much that you're so serious about it. Just go, well, how can I maybe laugh my way through this a little bit?
My gosh, if I would have laughed my way through some of this stuff a lot sooner than I did, well, it just would have been more fun, right? Like, if there's anybody on this, who's listening to this, who's going to participate in this, it's who can understand the struggle and how real we can make it. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I was laughing, actually. You might, this gal, and I won't say her name because I want to honor her. But there was somebody on our shared Instagram feeds who posted recently, has anybody else's dark night of the soul gone longer than a night? Asking for a friend. And I just howled when I saw that, because I'm like, I texted her back. I'm like, yeah, I think I'm going on like a decade. Like, really? I'm like, no, not really. But it's kind of felt like that at some point. So joy, healing, I love it all. Being creative, playing, and I love the idea of giving ourselves permission, not waiting for permission, but giving ourselves permission to integrate this idea of playing with our creative expression, playing with how things are ending and how things might be looking to begin, playing with receiving. So many stories about stuff from conversations with people, but one of the things that I think that I would like to leave with people also is to really consider, or go and look at what some of the astrologers are saying about the nodal shift. The nodal shift, the south and the north nodes shifting. They're moving into Pisces and Virgo. And first of all, if you have this in your natal chart, if your north node or your south node is in Pisces or Virgo, you're probably going to feel this even more potently. But Pisces, I often think of as like the creator archetype. There's just so much like mystical kind of energy that can come through with Pisces. And at the same time, Virgo is very practical, very like, okay, but this is how we're going to do that. And it's kind of a tug of war at times, I think. But I think that is also creating a bit of an opportunity for us to, and so that nodal shift is going to impact everybody. It's not just if it's in your natal chart. I'm saying if it's in your natal chart, it's probably going to impact you even more so. But the collective on a whole is moving into this new space. And if you kind of know anything about the North Node and the South Node, the North Node is really about following your star, following your North Star. And so this North Star, I think my interpretation of it is the invitation to let it be a little abstract, let it be a little undefined for a little while, and trust that the Virgo side of things will help it take form. So
well, it's almost like it's taking a little bit of the logic out of it and saying, I don't always have to know how. I don't always have to know. And honestly, we don't always even have to know why. It's just, well, what do I do with this now? What do I get to choose to do with this? And even in terms of, you know, that creative expression or what it is that we want to share and being open to giving. You know, some people listening might say, well, how do I receive from God? Like, how do I make sure I'm home so that I get the package, you know? Is it coming to the front door or the back door, you know? And I think one of the simplest ways to really actively and intentionally practice receiving in your own life is, how can you do that on a human form more fully? You know, so it could be something as simple as, you know, say a loved one shares a hug with you. You know, is it just like, okay, I'm going through the motions, or are you actually allowing yourself to open up your heart and receive from that person, right? Like, can you fully receive in that moment? Or maybe it's a compliment or something, but actually say, thank you, and allow yourself to receive that. So just, I always say, start simple. Keep it simple. It doesn't have to be overly convoluted when it comes to tuning into the energy.
Alli, we've got a little bit of time just to kind of start to put a bow on this, talk a little bit about it. I was just checking to see if there were any comments on YouTube. There aren't yet, and that's okay. But I didn't want anybody to leave not having a question answered. And you're welcome to ask it on YouTube if you're watching. But as we're kind of bringing this in for a landing, if you will, I know that sometimes when you and I talk, it's sometimes possible that we take people who are simply curious into like the deep end of the pool, and we forget if we've put their water wings on, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So I would like for us to throw just, you know, ground the conversation back into we're just at this, we were at the very beginning of our journey of exploring some of these things. Like, we just didn't know anything about anything. And that was a long time ago. But how would you support people, or how would you invite people to take what they've heard and maybe find one or two steps that feel accessible to them, feel approachable and manageable for them?
I think just bringing it back to the energy of opportunity, that every day is an opportunity, every conversation is an opportunity, every moment that you're at rest is an opportunity. And so if we bring it back to the energy of opportunity, we always have the ability to choose, and we can always have the ability to receive even just a little bit more. And so if we link it back to, well, what is my choice? What do I choose to do with this opportunity right now? Am I going to let it throw me up in arms and interrupt the next 3 months of my life? Or do I want to allow myself to sit with it, to try to just fully understand it as much as I can, and then choose what I want to do next, right? I think a lot of the time we get too focused on the end result or too focused on the big picture. That's what's overwhelming to us, is we're going, well, holy fuck, like, how am I going to get from here to here? And then that's when we give up and we go, oh, okay, I'm just going to like freeze right in this moment. So if we just bring it back to these little bite-sized opportunities, like, okay, here's my opportunity to choose what actually intuitively maybe feels like it makes the most sense to my heart, and not always the brain, because the brain is really good at keeping us safe, but it's not always the best when it comes to creative exploration. So letting the heart be the headlights in the dark to say, how do I want to navigate this opportunity, and know that we are guided in that. And just, again, it's the choice, and that there really are no backward steps, that we're always where we're meant to be. We are always moving to where we're supposed to be. We're always stepping deeper into ourselves. It's just sometimes the gifts aren't always going to come with a pretty bow on them, right? Sometimes the package might be kind of beat up. Maybe Amazon drove over it before it got delivered, but it's just reminding ourselves that the package is going to be a little bit different sometimes.
Wonderful. I'm going to receive that, and I'm going to send it back into the quantum field for my past self, who I love her, and she could have made different choices if she had been a little bit more mindful about the choices, and where she wanted to take those things. If I was going to add on one last thing, one of the things that really became so top of mind for me as I was navigating these age-changing times, as I was diving down rabbit holes, and I was, processing the million red pills, what really came front and center for me was that I was trying to do this all at one time, which is why I'm sending light and love back to my past self. Trying to take it on all at one time, trying to create it all at one time, as opposed to recognizing that we will only shift 1 degree at a time, right? It's like when you're steering a big boat, right? Or when they talk about paradigm shifts, and there's no way that I can even look back over the last 10 or 12 years and say that anything shifted any faster than 1 degree at a time. Because I might have taken it all in, but I ended up going back on it quite a number of times because I didn't have capacity for it. So 1 degree at a time, 1 degree at a time.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's great advice. Just whatever's right in front of me in this present moment.
Yeah, and staying present.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop the live stream. And for those who are